everybody. Welcome to my low production value, low budget YouTube channel, Adventures in the Free World, where I occasionally come on to say things that are on my mind about geopolitics and sociocultural issues if I haven't heard anybody else saying those things. Um, so if you don't know what this channel is about, that is what it's about. I'm not a career vlogger, although I do write on Medium and Substack on Due Dissidence's Substack from time to time under Adventures in the Free World. Um, However, like a lot of us who are leftists, as defined by not taking part in the two-party system at all, it is hard for me to turn off my brain and not pay attention to the things that are going on. And because I pay attention to them, I often have thoughts about them. And then I look around and I watch all the other independent media and see what kind of conversations are going on and who's saying what. And if I don't see discussion at all or enough discussion in the direction of the way I'm thinking, then I will post a video about it. So for those of you who have been checking those out, I really appreciate it. Definitely, we're going to always get photo bombed by cats. And I have no editing capabilities, so this is just going to be extemporaneous talking. I'm going to try to shorten this up, though. I have two things on my mind today. I'm going to cut them into segments. The first one is that this is the most disappointing election I've ever seen in my life, at a time when it should be the most exciting election that I've ever seen in my life. That sucks. So I'm going to talk about that first, and then the other thing on my mind, which I'll chop into a second segment for the sake of length, is I have a lot of thoughts and observations about the Palestine situation and what it says about the shift in the winds around the world. So we'll get to that as well. Let's talk about this election first, though. I mean, this whole thing sucks. If you had told me a year or a couple of years ago that we would have an election where there was not just one prominent, like, name recognizable independent candidate running against the two-party system, I just would have been over the top elated. And it would have just made me feel so hopeful for even just being able to cause disruption to our electoral system, And instead, we now have three candidates, and I feel no optimism at all. I don't really know if this is going to have any impact whatsoever. I think the best that we can hope for is that a collective percentage of the electorate among independent voters, non-voters, and people who have left either of the two parties maybe makes their voices known by just not voting for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. But I don't think that the mainstream media is going to cover that. I think they'll find ways to obscure it from people. I think on election night, they might even just have Biden and Trump up on the board, and then they might have a category that says other, and then they won't even talk about those tallies going the other category. And then when Trump or Biden wins, they'll declare them the winner, and everybody will act like that's what happened during the election. So I don't know. This just doesn't feel good to me at all. I'm going to talk about all three of the candidates briefly. So we have Dr. Cornel West, who has now changed his party affiliations twice in a 5-month period and decided to run as an independent. We have Kennedy, who everybody was hoping would leave the Democrats and run as an independent, and then he finally did. And now we have Dr. Jill Stein, who has decided to re-enter the race. So first things first, I'll put the link in the About section. I did another video called Dear Dr. West based on the letter that I sent first directly to him through his campaign and then posted as an open letter on Medium under my my Medium page, Adventures in the Free World. I never posted that video. I might still, I don't know. But you can find it. It's called Dear Dr. West. I wrote a really thorough open letter to him covering much of the points that I just haven't heard really being discussed or being discussed enough as far as concerns from people who either are supporting him or were supporting him and the other left independent media. But since really, I mean, I was so excited for Dr. West to be running, and I really thought that he had the ability to galvanize a huge coalition, a huge and very diverse coalition of voters in order to be able to cause some serious disruption to this election. Hold on a second. I have to deal with a disciplinary issue. Okay. Anyway, I was so excited. A lot of us were very excited. And his decisions have just been horrible for a long time. I mean, I tried to overlook some of them. I mean, it took him a really long time to even do any kind of a campaign launch. Like, his launch event didn't happen until September, and he announced this campaign in June. He seemed like he had really great momentum because he was doing so many interviews all the time, and he was being featured on a huge and diverse range of media. Conservative black media, leftist black media, mainstream media, everywhere in the media. But he wasn't really getting out there. And I think that when he made his transition to the Green Party campaign, a lot of us were looking at that as, well, the Green Party is dealing with ballot access issues right now. And so I participated on a couple of different Zoom calls with that Dr. West was present on with his wife, Anahita. One of them that I joined when I was adminning one of the Cornell West for President groups on Facebook was for the Arizona ballot access team. Even though I don't live in Arizona, I wanted to learn about ballot access and learn how to help out from Florida, where I am. And then about a month later, I was on a Zoom call. This one happened after the Jimmy Dore interview with the Stop Cop City protesters in Atlanta. And Dr. West and Anahita were on that Zoom call as well. And we all had the opportunity to ask questions. So I, brought up similar things, but so on this, I did a video on this already. So actually, I don't want to go over the same ground and then make this unnecessarily long. But, he has been asked a lot of questions from a lot of supporters about how he plans to build a broader base of support and adapt his messaging in such a way that it reaches more people. And the thing I brought up on the Stop Cop City call in particular was really relevant to how he's been handling his own campaign, his whole campaign. And this is something that Jimmy Dore pointed out in his that interview that went so badly, was that on the left, we assume a basis of knowledge that is kind of obvious to all of us because we pay so much attention to things. And I think it's easy for us to forget that mainstream Americans don't have nearly the knowledge or understanding about basic stuff having to do with the way that this country works. And the biggest problem to running and building any kind of a leftist movement that I can see is that we live in a country where we're born and bred never to be able to engage in any kind of a systemic critique of the country at all. We don't even have a vocabulary for systemic critique. We're raised with this notion of meritocracy and this notion of personal accountability everywhere all the time. It's in our media, our pop culture, it's in our school system, it's in higher ed, it's everywhere. And disappointingly, it's even, all over the personal growth space, which sucks because I listen to a lot of podcasts and I'm very into that type of stuff, like personal growth and self-development and all those kinds of things. But a lot of those podcasters are, like, I don't know how much positive thinking is going to break you out of a fundamentally oppressive system that doesn't work anymore more for the majority of people in the country. So getting to my point about that is that if you want to build a leftist movement where you center awareness about systemic issues such as white supremacy, you have to start by educating people what the hell you mean about white supremacy. And there have been a lot of concerns raised at Dr. West very directly, including when I had the opportunity to directly interact with him on Zoom, that we don't really see this happening. And because of that, you are restricting your audience down to people who only already know what you're talking about. And so that's where the whole big, is class downstream of race or race downstream of class, or which thing do you lead with, just becomes like a perpetual problem in leftist discussions. And I have yet to see any movement on that. I have yet to see any type of collaborative discussion where people from, that come from kind of both sides of this thing actually get together and say, well, how do we work this out and get on the same page? And so, like, one of the biggest detriments on the left is that there are so many divisions due to, everybody kind of being siloed into different echo chambers, and having their priorities listed in a slightly different order. So even though we're all for the same things, we don't value all of those same things in the same order, or see them as, coming in the same order when it comes to any kind of like a strategic implementation. So Dr. West has done a lot of things that have raised enough concerns at this point where I have just entirely stopped supporting his campaign. Now, I may end up voting for him. It depends on who's in the ballot in the state of Florida. Whichever not duopoly candidate is on the ballot in the state of Florida is going to get a vote for me. But I'll be damned if I'm going to put an ounce of time, energy, or money into any of them at this point, because I'm not seeing what I need to see. First of all, let's think about 2016 and 2020. At this time in the election, Bernie Sanders was filling entire stadiums. Entire stadiums. In fact, I believe he was filling stadiums before this point, even in his 2016 campaign, and had over 1 million volunteers on the ground in every single state. He had built a sizable movement that was extremely broad. He had a humongous amount of support among every demographic, except for, unfortunately, the baby boomers. And, you could say what you want about if you think generational critique is divisive or not. It's just a fact. Less than 15% of baby boomers in both of those primaries were on board with Bernie Sanders. So it is generational. But Cornel West doesn't have a movement. And in order for a run like this outside the duopoly to have a real impact, you need a movement. And you need a huge movement, which means you can't be alienating parts of your base. And so when you are, interviewing on channels that are more kind of libertarian socialist or populist leftist channels like Jimmy Dore and Hardlands and Convo Couch, and they start grilling you about people's concerns about the pandemic, you better give them a response that is appropriately proportionate to the degree of people's concern about it, or you're going to lose those people. And regardless of what anybody says or thinks, because of the echo chamber that they live in and the people they know, and whether or not they personally think it's a priority, the pandemic is a big, huge deal breaker, number one issue for a whole lot of voters across the spectrum. And it is the primary reason that Kennedy had so much support from the Bernie Sanders contingent for such a long time. And it seems like, there are still many people who are stridently on board with Kennedy in spite of his horrible positions on Israel for that reason, because this is not the only pandemic we're going to see. There's going to be more pandemics. And what our government is going to do in the face of those pandemics, particularly as now for 2 years, irrefutable peer-reviewed data has been coming out from all over the world about the devastating amount of damage that mRNA drugs have been doing to people on a mass scale, and how that was known from the very beginning and it's still being pushed. Um, Not to mention all of the damage that quarantines and lockdowns and masks have done to people. You're never going to succeed in a campaign if you minimize that and if you refuse to address it. And for people who say, but Dr. West has a truth commission listed right on his website and his platform, a truth commission is not enough. I mean, it doesn't cite any commitment to action, like what would happen after a truth commission. What are you going to do to the people who lied us into this? What are you going to do to the people who funded gain of function research and were the cause of this entire thing being created and getting out all over the world in the first place? I mean, there's just it's a nothing burger. Okay, so, and at this point, we've all seen that kind of platform 100 times before. Mike Gravel had it, Bernie Sanders had it, Elizabeth Warren had parts of it, even though we all know she was just a Trojan horse that was in the race in order to split the left. Jill Stein had it. We've seen this. And so it's like Cornel West can have the best campaign platform and a really snazzy logo and shades of brown and all of this that he wants to, but without a workable campaign strategy, the platform doesn't mean fuck all for anybody. And so the primary concerns about Dr. West that evolve for me, aside from the things that people have already said, I mean, the horrible Jimmy Dore interview, the way that he was smearing Jimmy Dore as a Trumper when he's spent the first 3 months of his campaign saying that he wants to actually reach Trump voters. So how are you going to reach Trump voters when you're disparaging people that they listen to on a regular basis, and disparaging their value system in such a egregious way, you know? And then a lot of people had major issues with the decision to hire Peter Dow. I don't share those feelings. I mean, I think that Peter Dow was, we all agree that he was awful when he was part of the Clinton campaign. I can understand people having doubts about whether or not he really had a come to Jesus moment. He's said like lots of great leftist things on Twitter and whatnot for the last few years. Um, I have a much more charitable take of Peter Dow after watching him interview on Sabby Sab's channel and with Brianna on Bad Faith. As far as I'm concerned, he was pouring his little heart out. I know we all would like him to have arrived at the Dem exit party a whole lot sooner and like without disparaging Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein and doing all the damage that he did. But unfortunately, people have their awakenings when they have them, and we don't get to choose what schedule they have their fucking awakenings on. So much as that sucks, I believe him to be sincere. Regardless, selecting Peter Dow as your campaign manager and then seeing this huge outcry from your supporters in response to it calls for an answer. And not an answer from Jill Stein coming onto shows and talking about it or other people. It calls for an answer from Cornel West. And so now we start accumulating a list of things that people have been directly asking Dr. West to answer for, and his continuing refusal to answer for them. He has refused to engage in any kind of conversation about the Jimmy Dore interview, addressing the concerns that were brought up everywhere, and I've looked everywhere. In fact, that gets worse, but I'll get to that in a minute. He's refused to directly address his selection of Peter Dow. This includes in his campaign emails, because I never stopped getting emails from the campaign soliciting funding and then wanting me to get on volunteer calls to start, working for ballot access. I mean, I haven't seen any communication from Dr. West where he has meaningfully addressed these concerns anywhere ever. And the outcry from supporters wanting answers about this, which we deserve if we're going to be putting our trust and our time and our money and our hopes and dreams into this candidate, we deserve answers on that stuff. I haven't seen them. Not yet. Not one time. And then Okay, so here's where this gets really bad. I don't know if you guys have watched his interviews on Tim Black. Um, you know, so Tim Black is basically just a fanboy of Dr. West at this point. He was present on the Stop Cop City Zoom call. Um, I've seen him. He's done several long interviews with Dr. West on his channel. You guys are certainly welcome to watch those and see what you think for yourself. But the interviews that raised the major red flags for me, um, like, he's got enough of a platform where he could ask Dr. West really challenging questions, and unfortunately Dr. West has now choose to limit all of his media exposure to people who are just going to throw him softballs and nod their head and endorse every single thing he says. So I was hopeful when I saw that Tim Black did 2 interviews in a single week with him right after the Jimmy Dore interview, and then another one that was shortly after the Peter Dow announcement, since those things all happened in a relatively short period of time. And I listened to all of those interviews very attentively because I was hoping that he would get around to asking specific questions about this, and that maybe that they would be, answered. And not only were they not answered, Tim Black brought up the Jimmy Dore interview in this kind of how dare anybody question you, and who is Jimmy Dore, to imply that you need advisors, and that you're not thinking for yourself and you're taking advice from other people. Like, that's a bad thing. Like, what the hell is wrong with you if you think that a politician doesn't need advisors? Like, every single politician needs advisors. You are not supposed to be the expert on your own campaign. I can't believe this even has to be explained. So, not only is Tim Black just wrong on that, but then he's like entering into this thing like, you're the host and the interviewer, you're supposed to be pushing this guy, and instead you're commiserating with him. And then Cornel West goes out on this rant, which anybody who's been listening to him have heard this at least 20 times from him by now. I'm a free black man, I think for myself, I don't need advisors, I can make up my own mind. And I mean, so he doubled down on that, but then it got worse, because then 3 different interviews, he outright disparaged his own supporters by verbatim saying that everybody questioning his campaign strategy, and to review what I mean by that, the strategy of joining the People's Party without doing any due diligence, and then leaving the People's Party, and then joining the Green Party without doing any due diligence, and then leaving the Green Party, and then deciding to start all over again for a 3rd time in 5 months, a year out from the election, as an independent with 0 ballot access, and then hiring Peter Dow as your campaign manager, and then disparaging anybody concerned about the pandemic on the Jimmy Dore interview as a Trumper. Those decisions, those are the ones that people have been asking questions about, as well as his insistence on centering white supremacy without defining white supremacy for anybody, and just assuming everybody that listens to him is going to know what the hell he means, and then talking in this academic way everywhere he goes, really talking over people's heads. Like, he seems to forget that only 30% of Americans ever went to college. And he displayed this resistance when Jimmy Dore was pushing him and saying, you have to language your message in a way that people can understand you. And Dr. West continues to perceive that as people saying you have to change your position and, compromise yourself, and you're not allowed to be what you're about. Now you have to be about different things. Like, nobody has been saying be about different things and change your positions. But everybody has been saying if people can't understand you, then you could be about all the best things in the world and it's not going to make a difference. So he gets on Tim Black and they start discussing this, and outright, verbatim, Dr. West called all of his supporters questioning him spiritually impoverished on 3 different interviews. Spiritually impoverished. And on one of them, he actually said morally and spiritually impoverished. So now, those of us who are like on his side and saying, give us a reason to invest in you, we want you to succeed, we want you to help you in every way that we can, and we see you making some strategic missteps that we're concerned about, and giving them like feedback in good faith to help him be able to do this better. He's calling us morally and spiritually impoverished for questioning him. And then said he doesn't owe anybody answers for anything. Actually said that. I don't owe anybody answers for anything. I'm not answerable to anyone. I'm a free black man. I make up my own mind. I am only answerable to God. And then, as the interview continued, is when I started picking up demagogue vibes. And demagogue vibes are not good, man. I mean, it should raise a red flag in everybody's mind whenever somebody starts making it really clear that they are believed they are called by God to do something. Did you watch Game of Thrones? Because I watched all of Game of Thrones, and I was Team Daenerys all the way through that show. And regardless of how Dan and Dave completely fucked up the show version and ruined Daenerys' story arc, and we can say all kinds of things about how they ruined it, the fact is that Daenerys turned out to be this demagogue in the end. And all along, we believed she was out to free the people. You know? Always be wary of anybody that thinks they're called by God for the greater good. Especially when they start saying that they don't need to listen to anybody else and they don't need advisors from anybody else. I'm sorry, that's not what leadership looks like. And there's no politician in the world that gets a pass on that. They just don't. So it became very clear to me in that and other interviews that Cornel West feels very strongly that he has been called by God. He is listening only to God. Therefore, he doesn't need feedback from any other people. He thinks that he's following this calling by making these horrible strategic decisions. And worse, that everybody is supposed to just trust that and jump on board with him without asking any questions about it. So that is why I walked away. And at this point, I have yet to see it. Like I said, I'd love it if you gave my Medium page some love. It's under Adventures in the Free World. The letter is called Dear Dr. West. It's pretty thorough and covers all these points. And if you really want to do something, take that link and start sending it to his campaign yourself. If you guys are still holding out hope for Dr. West to somehow be able to pull this out in the end. But I just don't see it. I think he's alienated too many people from the voting pool that he needed. And at this point, less than a year out from the election, he has no movement to speak of. I don't know how big his volunteer base is. And he's starting at square one with getting on actual presidential ballots. So I'm not going to speak on whether or not I think that Cornel West is serious or not serious about a presidential campaign. A lot of people have said that they don't think he's serious at all, that this isn't a real campaign. He doesn't really intend to win. I don't think he's going to drop out and endorse Joe Biden. I think that ship has definitely sailed, and I think he's been very clear about the fact that he is not in support of the duopoly. But like a lot of people have said, his failure to acknowledge fascism for what it is, and fascism in the Democratic Party and the Biden administration, is a major problem. So I'm going to pause for a sip of coffee for a moment before I move on to the next candidate. But that's pretty much my take on Cornel West, you guys. I mean, feel free to comment for or against on that. I'm always open to engaging with people's opinions as long as it's constructive. I'm not going to waste a minute debating with shit libs or the excessively woke contingent. I'm not going to mess with ad hominem. But if you've got disagreements, I mean, definitely tell me about them. I really wanted to see Dr. West succeed. I mean, I was all in for him. I really was. And it's so, I get no joy in saying this, but I don't think he has a shot in hell. And I think he has fucked up his whole campaign beyond saving at this point. Now we move on to Kennedy. It would have been amazing to see Kennedy turn around and finally leave the Democratic Party. I don't know that that engendered a lot of faith in him for me, because I feel like anybody who didn't know what the Democratic Party is by the 2020 primary is either asleep or just willfully ignorant. So there's no excuse. And just a sidebar on that, I'm still incredibly pissed off at everybody that voted for Joe Biden in 2020. I'm really conflicted because it's like, well, I'm happy to see the giant show of support for Palestine from all kinds of people. The people that are saying, I voted for Biden in 2020, but I'm not going to vote for him again because of Palestine, just makes me angry that they voted for him at all, because it's not like all 40 years of his political record wasn't widely fucking available to anybody that was paying attention. And it's not like a whole lot of leftists weren't shouting from the rooftops that Biden was a very bad idea. Um, but no, they didn't listen to us. So, but I digress. So, getting to Kennedy, there have been a lot of things that I really like about him. Um, I think that he fundamentally has a huge amount of integrity and is fundamentally well intentioned, misguided though he is on several issues. And so I feel like there's been a failure among the leftist media to draw the distinction between being full of shit and lying about something and deliberately trying to deceive people versus really believing in what you're saying, but just being flat out fucking wrong. And Kennedy is flat out wrong on Israel. Wrong, wrong, wrong. All the way wrong, 100% wrong. Like, irredeemably wrong. However, he really does believe it. He really believes in what he's saying. So this is where the conflict showed up for me. I mean, when he was running with the Democrats, there wasn't anything he ever could have done to get my support because I'm just never voting Democrat again. So that was the deal breaker. Taking billionaire money, also a big deal breaker. His statements in favor of capitalism, not good. He told Kim Iverson in interviews that he actually believes that the free market is the solution to the climate catastrophe. So that's amazing, because how is a guy who's been an environmental lawyer for this long still bought into the idea that free markets can solve the climate catastrophe? Like, I mean, you cannot get rid of climate destruction without getting rid of capitalism, any more than you can get rid of racism without getting rid of capitalism. I mean, it's just, I don't know how somebody that intelligent could still believe that. But the deal breaker for a lot of us, even people that were from the former Bernie Sanders contingent and on the left, enthusiastically, that were supporting Kennedy, obviously, is his position on Israel. Now, I don't understand why that is not a deal breaker for everybody. I know several people personally and through different social media that are still Team Kennedy, although they're being a whole lot less vocal about it now. And they will not disclose why Israel's not a deal breaker for them. But before Kennedy started to really double down after October 7th on his awful Zionist statements and advocating for censorship of people who are dissenting on behalf of Palestine, his positions on Israel were still pretty well known. And what people were telling me about why they were supporting him is that their number one and two things in no particular order are the pandemic and the pandemic response, particularly jab mandates of the mRNA drugs, and their fear of an actual nuclear war, of Biden starting an actual nuclear war with Russia. And because of his strong position on Ukraine and putting that to an end, they basically said that they were willing to let all of their other positions take a backseat to those two positions. And, you know, for a long time, I was inclined to almost agree with them only after he left the Democratic Party. And once Cornel West started really fucking up, I was starting to think, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really don't like Kennedy's position on Israel either, but the pandemic is a huge deal, and so is nuclear war. You know, he seems to have a lot of momentum. Maybe I'd vote for him. Um, but he's just gotten worse and worse on Israel. I mean, most of this stuff has been apparently on Twitter. Um, I've only seen that stuff through independent media showing what he's been tweeting because I've been banned on Twitter. Neera Tanden got my account banned back during the Iowa caucus because I was trolling the shit out of her in Third Way. So I haven't been able to get on Twitter ever since. But he's been speaking in a very hawkish manner at this point, advocating for censorship of pro-Palestinian dissent, advocating for colleges, actually making sure that college students can't get a job after college, for demonstrating on behalf of Palestine. Um, he has also been getting very hawkish on other issues and saying really concerning things about Russia and China, as well as continually doubling down on this idea that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and, they're our key to preserving oil. I mean, at this point, there's no daylight between what he says about geopolitics and all of the standard direct that we get from the Republicans and the Democrats and their operatives like John Bolton. And it's really, really disappointing to see because I do believe Kennedy to be fundamentally honest and well intentioned and have a lot of integrity. Part of that is because of the fact that he's been very open about the fact that he's 32 years sober, and rigorous honesty is a fundamental tenet of 12-step programs. From personal experience, you cannot get or maintain long-term sobriety if you have a lot of splits within your personality, and a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. If you're dishonest with yourself, you won't survive sober. So I think that he really does mean it, but unfortunately, that makes no difference ultimately in his positions. I was really hoping that he would take up the invitation to have conversations with Max Blumenthal and Abby Martin, and other journalists who have been challenging him on his position on Israel. I've been hoping that Kennedy would go to Gaza. I mean, after all, he spent several days down at the border. Um, I was hoping he would go to Gaza and witness it for himself. And I was hoping that clear heads would prevail and be able to access his inner circle and move him in the right direction on that issue. And it just doesn't look like that's happened. I don't know whether it's him or whether he is just too insulated by AIPAC and the Israel lobby and, Adelson and Shmuley. I still say Botich. I've heard people say Botia. It looks like Botich to me. Rabbi, what's his face? Um, it just doesn't. It doesn't look like there's any redemption for Robert Kennedy at this point. If the actual Holocaust in Palestine is an issue for you, and I hate saying that. I hate saying that because he's so good on so many other things, and he's also the independent candidate with the most momentum. You know, and the most ability to galvanize support from the more libertarian leaning and right leaning populists that voted for Trump, not necessarily because they believed in Trump, but because they wanted to throw a grenade into the whole system. Um, so that sucks. Moving on to Joe Stein now. I wish I could say I was excited about that. I listened to Sabby Sabs and James Fauntleroy, and they did make a valid point where they said that the more third party candidates, the better, and that it is exciting to see so many people outside the two party system entering the race. Ooh, I gotta plug in my computer. I mean, yes, I kind of agree with that. I mean, if if your position is that the best thing that we can hope for is to cause disruption to the system and make our voices heard, that people are done with the duopoly and the Republicans and Democrats have just lost all legitimacy, then yes, it's a positive thing to have three third party candidates in the race. Um, all with their individual bases of support. The thing is that I feel like it's a missed opportunity not to have somebody actually win. I mean, look at this. Look at this moment. We have two utterly failed presidents that are the likely nominees on both sides, although I'm still inclined to believe that the Democrats are going to wait until the convention and then come up with an excuse for Biden's health and do this whole sentimental thing that Biden is taking the fall for everybody and magnanimously stepping down in order to allow, the younger generation to take over. Like, it's all going to be a bunch of sentimental horseshit, right? But I think they're going to sub in Gavin Newsom at the convention. Maybe even Gretchen Whitmer. Like, they might do the diversity hire thing, like, oh, we would do better if we had a woman. I still think they're going to sub him out. But regardless, right now we have two completely failed presidents in the race at a moment where for 8 years straight, polling across the political spectrum between voters and non-voters of all party registrations has never been higher for the demand for third parties. I mean, I think it's like over 62%. And I think one poll even hit like over 70% demand for third parties. And it's so obvious because Kennedy has been polling so high. Cornel West, even with all his fuck ups, is still polling at 6%, which is higher than the Green Party has ever been able to achieve. Now we have Jill Stein polling at around 2 or 3%. There's still some holdouts for Marianne Williamson. I mean, like, the opportunity here to have galvanized the left around a singular third party candidate and actually win the fucking election. I mean, we've never had an opportunity like this. And I don't know if we're going to get it again, because I don't know how much you people have been paying attention. I don't mean you people in like a condescending way. I don't know how much you guys have been paying attention, but the first thing the Biden administration did was manufacture the whole January 6th horse shit and use it as an excuse to implement draconian anti-dissent laws, categorizing all of us, anybody wearing this or with a Palestinian flag or protesting against animal agriculture or for the environment or anything else, is now technically by federal law a domestic terrorist, right? The whole Domestic Terrorism Act. All of that, they had to come up with an event to scare the shit out of people, and so they manufactured this insurrection, which it has long been known was completely conjured up by the FBI. The whole thing at the Capitol. I warned people about that during the entire 2020 primary, that the first thing the Democrats would do if they won the election, and the first thing Biden would do, would be to wage a war against dissent from the left and double down on censorship and criminalization of dissent. And sure enough, he did. So I don't think that the opportunity for dissent is going to be here in this country much longer at all. I mean, if you had any idea the extent to which the mass surveillance dragnet and censorship dragnet is descending on us all, it's even worse than I thought. I'll post some links in the About section, or you can go to TrueStream Media's channel. They did a recent video about the 5th generation War, where she scrolls through military documents right on the screen that you can read about the types of things that are now being done, including shit like being able to capture our fingerprints from 8 feet away. We're not going to have a chance to dissent for very much longer. And I would not put it above the electoral system to completely rig the 2024 election in favor of whoever the Pentagon has selected, which is pretty much guaranteed they've selected Biden or his replacement. I mean, it's just, so this was the moment. I mean, this was the moment. I believe this was the moment. I hope that I'm wrong. But if there was ever a moment to galvanize the whole left across the entire spectrum around united class solidarity behind a singular third-party candidate like Dr. West, that was the fucking moment. And now instead, we have completely diffused the impact by dividing up the pie between three third party candidates, none of whom are going to win it. That's what sucks. Um, I don't know any other way to put it. I mean, now the pie is divided too many ways, and it's going to be too easy for the media establishment to minimize the impact by making every single one of these candidates look totally separate and presenting each one of their voter bases as being totally separate instead of saying, look, over 30% of voters obviously want a third party and they have made their voices heard. They're not going to say that. So not only is the message not going to get out, it's just going to be yet another election where third parties are predictably disparaged in the same ways that they always are. And, people in different factions will have gotten excited for a minute about their particular candidate, and then everything is going to go on business as usual. That's what I think. And I hate it because, look, I think Jill Stein is amazing. I have a lot of respect for her. I, would love to have seen her be the one in 2016. And I would love to feel excited about her. But, having come from not knowing anything about the Green Party and just getting on board with the Green Party because Cornel West was running with the Green Party, I've heard enough people talk about the problems within the Green Party to kind of see that I just think the upside is they have all the ballot access, right? So that's a good thing. And she knows how to get on ballots, also a good thing. And third thing, she has name recognition, also a good thing. So I don't think it's going to take any time at all for the people who supported her in 2016 to jump on board with supporting her again. And all of that is good. My concerns are the Green Party still has on their website that they are pro-mandate, pro-lockdown, and pro WHO, NIH narrative about the pandemic. And that is a deal breaker for a lot of us. So my question for Jill Stein is, where does she stand? Because if she is running on the Green Party, doesn't she have to adopt their platform? And if she has to adopt their platform, doesn't she have to adopt that part of their platform? And also, she's a medical doctor. And a whole lot of medical doctors fell right for the narrative and have refused to update their information as information has come out. So I don't know what side of that issue she's on, but that is a deal breaker for me and a lot of people that I know. And the fact that the Green Party hasn't moved on that, in spite of the Green Party's Black Caucus issuing a scathing manifesto against lockdowns and mandates, which Jimmy Dore read and cited in his interview with Cornel West. They're not listening to their own Black contingent, which is kind of like antithetical to their anti-racist messaging, I think. If you got your entire Black contingent saying, we're not on board with this major tenet of your platform, and they're like, yeah, well, we're going to do it anyway. And then there's also all this stuff about Howie Hawkins being a Russiagator and all this other shit, right? So, and then worst of all, if Jill Stein was the person who selected Peter Dow to be Cornel West's campaign manager, causing that whole kerfuffle over that, and Peter Dow was a major part of disparaging her. Like, look, I'm all for forgiveness and, mending fences and letting water be under the bridge and, embracing people into the left as they wake up on their own time schedule, even though their time schedule is shitty and caused them to support shitty things until they finally just got around to becoming more aware. I'm all for those things, right? But she's generated a lot of distrust, I think, and a lot of questions. And I and other people would need to see those questions get answered in a really substantive, meaningful way in order to feel assured um, that she's really running a serious campaign. So I don't know, man. Regardless of what happens with either of these three candidates, the fact that there are three of them, while I can completely understand the validity of the point, this is what democracy is supposed to look like. The more parties, the better. The more people running outside the two-party system, the better. like I get it, right? But I was holding out hope for somebody actually being able to win. And I don't see, I've never seen a moment where a third party candidate had a stronger chance of winning the whole thing than this moment. And I feel like that opportunity has been squandered. And I do not feel optimistic at all that we're ever going to get this opportunity again. I just, so that's where I'm at. I mean, an election that should have been the most exciting thing I've ever seen in my life is just now like a major disappointment. I feel totally cynical. I'm not donating to anybody. I'm not volunteering for anybody. Whichever one of them happens to be on the ballot in Florida in the general election, like I'll show up to vote for one of them. Um, honestly, I might even end up voting for Kennedy. And I know, some of you may be um, outraged over that. But look, if the guy's at 22% and he galvanizes a whole lot of people and he is still standing strong about shutting down the Ukraine war and still standing strong on the pandemic and willing to do like literally anything about things like the climate catastrophe. Um, I mean, like those are things we need. I fucking hate his position on Israel, so I'd have to say that there's like a 30% chance that he would end up getting my vote and a 70% chance that he won't. I mean, I have a modicum of hope that somebody will be able to get through to him. Um, but that's, I mean, it'll probably end up being Jill Stein in the end. I don't know. I'm so undecided and just so disappointed. And I just wanted to be able to commiserate with you all because I'm not hearing these conversations really happening um, on any of the leftist media. I'm not being invited onto anybody's live streams. I don't know why I got ghosted by Due Dissonance, but I guess they kind of ghosted me. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, but whatever. They don't owe me anything. Everybody gets to do whatever they want with their podcast, right? So, um, but I will put some links in the comments. I'm going to close this down and then jump back on and talk about what I think is telling about the situation in Palestine. I hope a few of you will give this a listen. It's a lot longer than I planned, but I'd love to hear your takes on the election. Um, let me know. And it really does look like everything that is ever going to happen, if it happens at all, is only going to happen from the ground up. I mean, if any of us on the Bernie contingent learned anything, it is that there are no heroes in politics, and getting excited about politicians, I guess, is just kind of a fool's game. I mean, I wish that were different, but it isn't right now. So, all right, guys, keep the faith, fam. See you soon. Bye.